Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to this Mythic Plus Week Analyzed. This week's affixes are Tyrannical, Raging, and Explosive, in addition to, of course, Awakened. And this is a combination of affixes that is pretty nasty for very high key pushing, and also pretty nasty for pulling keys at a level where you're actually, like, if you're just farming 15s and you're used to being able to just pull a lot of stuff together, AoE it all down, and do the bosses and have a pretty easy time. This is also a hard week for that. There is a little bit of a sweet spot somewhere in the middle there, somewhere between farming 15s and pushing world first keys, where this week is actually not that bad though, the reason this is bad for world first level keys, in addition to just Tyrannical being active and Tyrannical being harder than Fortified, is that Explosive is an affix that basically says you can't pull a big amount of enemies at once without there being a huge problem. And Tyrannical is an affix that says, because these boss fights are so long, you need to pull a bunch of enemies together at once in order to have any time in the dungeon, right? The trash isn't that hard, there's no Fortified active, so you need to pull trash big to time the dungeon. And obviously those two are really at odds with each other. You can't do both of those at the same time. But if the keystone level gets a little bit lower, right, if it's not quite world first key level, but if it's like, maybe 2 levels below what your group could do on the best push week possible, then all of a sudden this week gets quite good, because all of a sudden all you need to do to time the keys is just pull one pack at a time, press W and run through the dungeon in a straight line, pulling one pack at a time. And if that's happening, the packs aren't that bad, right? Raging Explosive. Raging can be a little bit of a pain, especially if you don't have a Soothe effect, but even then it's Raging Tyrannical, so the mobs aren't going to be, Raging Fortified, which isn't a combo we see except in the MDI. And the Explosive's not going to be too bad because you're only pulling 3 to 5 mobs at once in most dungeons. The worst dungeons this week are going to be the dungeons where you can't avoid pulling a bunch of enemies at once. So this is dungeons like Shrine of the Storm, where there's just so many like random Tide Sage Initiates or droplets or whatever that they still spawn explosives. Boss fights where there are going to be enemies that spawn explosives in weird places. This is something that, if you haven't done keys yet this week, you're try and just pre-think about that rather than discovering when you get to the boss fight that there's going to be explosives there. So again, Shrine of the Storm, for instance, the last boss there, those 5 ads, if you're like kiting them away, which many groups do, you're going to get a bunch of explosives spawning back there. It's not necessarily a wipe as long as they're going off staggered, because they won't one-shot your healer, even if they have 9 stacks of that debuff, but it still makes that fight pretty awful on explosive week. Templus Athralis, last boss, also pretty rough with explosive there because there's just ads all over the room, and usually you want to just be focused on one part of the room in there, and so this week you need to assign somebody to look at every side. When you're thinking about which classes are good to look for your group or are good to play yourself, if you have the option this week, play stuff that can kill explosives effectively, and play specs that can kill explosives effectively as well if you can. So choosing something like Outlaw over Assassination this week in particular, you'll have a lot easier time just switching to and quickly killing explosives. That kind of stuff will make it a lot easier for your group this week. Going more melee heavy, except one range that can really kill explosives effectively is Beast Mastery Hunter. But most of the other ones, they can kill them, but it tends to be a little bit more of a commitment, a little bit more of a DPS loss, and they have a little bit less ability to do it than most of the melee specs. Tanks as well. This is a big week where you will really notice if your tank and or healer are actively killing explosives, especially on something like a single target situation. In a single target situation, if your tank is just killing all of those orbs, that can make it so your DPS just doesn't have to think about it and doesn't have to lose any damage on the boss. In big pulls, oftentimes the way this works is there's usually like one person in the group whose job it is to just kill explosives. And if you're fighting like 5 mobs, usually the rogue or the DH or whatever is just going to be killing most of the explosives. You don't really want too many people in your group switching to the explosives every time they spawn, right? You don't want 3 people targeting the same explosive and then it immediately dies, and then 2 of them have just not done anything. So if you're in a group where you can trust the other people to target the explosives, have one person who's doing most of them, and then everybody else kind of helps out if you see 3 spawn all at once. If you see like a bunch of orbs spawning, if that person's falling behind, that's when then everybody else looks and immediately goes and kills 1 orb. That's, I think, the best way to attack this week. Okay, so yeah, we talked a little bit about the dungeons. Bad dungeons being like Shrine in particular, but any dungeon where you're going to have an explosive problem on a boss fight as well with Tyrannical can be, especially the Temple last boss, I think is one that is going to be really frustrating for a lot of players. Good dungeons this week. It's a tyrannical week, so I think that that's good news for like the Motherlode. Motherlode, I'd say, is a good dungeon this week if you have a Soothe effect. If you don't have a Soothe effect, the first wing of the trash is actually still very lethal, even without Fortified active when it's raging. So if you don't have a Soothe effect, you need to make really sure to like push one mob and then kill it really quickly from when it hits 30% before it can just start randomly one-shotting people. That would make that dungeon pretty hard. But if you do have a Soothe effect, I think that's one of the pretty good dungeons this week. And then other than that, really every dungeon is like not going to be doable at world first key levels because the big pulls are not going to work out as well, and also it's tyrannical. But every other dungeon you can pretty much just go in, and if you have enough time to just pull packs one at a time, or if you have enough damage as well, and players are doing a lot of damage now, I think that this week can be definitely a fine week to do some Mythic Plus. Just maybe not quite as much as some of the other weeks and some of the fortified weeks on the calendar. Anyways, there's just some of my thoughts about this week. Let me know if you like this video. Let me know if it helped. I will continue making these. Of course, I forgot to say this at the start of the video, but if you're interested in a video where I talk about each dungeon in particular with a route for the dungeon and everything, I have links to that in the description below, so go check that out if that's what you're looking for. We've already been on this week affix combo, so that's why I have that video already, and I didn't want to just make it again. So I've changed the video style for the past few. Anyways, that's it for this one. Remember to like and subscribe and stuff. Check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Ratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one.